This particular podcast is going to be quite a controversial one, and it's on the topic of sexual harassment and the increase of the number of reported cases, the increase of reported social media on this topic. Obviously, I'm going to put a disclaimer out there that sexual harassment can happen to anybody. It doesn't matter if you're male or female or of a particular gender that you identify with. It can happen to anybody. This particular topic that I'm going to focus on, this particular podcast, is going to mainly focus on the females because that seems to be the one particular topic area that seems to be within our mainstream social media on a bigger scale. And obviously, as some of you are aware, on a global mainstream sort of platform, there's been lots and lots of movement, hasn't there, with the famous cases that's happened in America with the Harvey Weinstein. And in fact, the repercussions of that is still reverberating. It's still having a ripple effect as they are trying harder to, basically hold people accountable and responsible. And we're seeing the wider impact, the wider issues that are coming up, basically, from people that have covered some of these issues and some of these topics very, very well, due to the fact they are from influential families, they are from families that perhaps have wealth, they're able to be in a particular circle or circuit that has been able to cover this up. And obviously now we have the big Me Too movement that happened not so long back, and again, people were finding the courage, finding, the confidence, I guess, and intrepidness, I guess, to open up those old wounds that they haven't healed from trauma, and from a psychology point of view, that's quite a huge thing, to be opening up your past traumas and trying to help yourself to heal, because obviously it's a trigger point, for many people that have buried that abuse and have buried those memories that unfortunately still haunt them, What I'm seeing now, though, is an increase in some countries doing a huge drive on sexual harassment and making it laws, and that's a positive step going forward. Some of these countries have dealt with some of those issues and dealt with some of those topics, but it's become a point where, unfortunately, it's become a situation where the female is always targeted as being the person to blame and the person at fault. And that's one of the reasons I'm having this podcast, because, it shouldn't be like that. But unfortunately, it still is. And it's going to take time to remove quite a lot of the, factors that are around that particular topic and for people to be able to move forward. So in some of these countries that I'm mentioning, I'm not going to mention the countries' names for obvious reasons, but in some of these countries, tradition plays a part, culture plays a part, religion plays a part, and the social norms, I guess, of expectations have taken part. Gender roles also take part in this as well. And, I've lived in some of these countries too that I'm talking about. So I'm not talking about social media aspects of things I've just seen and witnessed. These are things I've actually seen with my own eyes and I have lived through and I have had friends go through. And, it's fantastic, like I said, that countries are putting something in force, they're putting something in law, they're actually making people accountable, and that's been seen recently. However, already there seems to be a backlash with society. Society already are, for example, making posts like, for example, because a woman wears a particular perfume, it's enticing, therefore she deserves, for example, what happens to her. A woman shouldn't be wearing tight clothing that has ripped jeans. Now, the ripped jeans could be anywhere on that body, for example, below the knees. But culturally, traditionally, religiously, some individuals see that as going against their faith, going against their culture, and are basically targeting the female and saying, it is your fault that this particular sexual harassment and so on happened to you because of what you're wearing. Now, that should not be the case, but sadly it is happening. It is happening, and people are very quick at pointing the finger at the females and not necessarily looking at the male patterns of behaviour that triggers that whole concept anyway of why they're actually sexually harassing that individual. Now, I've had cases myself where, I've been in positions, where unfortunately sexual harassment has happened to me, and I've dealt with it the way that I can. At the time, whatever I thought was the best way of dealing with it, I've dealt with it. But upon reflection, you think to yourself, why should that situation happen to me? Why is it still happening to me? And why don't other people know about these things? Okay, sometimes for the fact that it's not your country, you don't want to make a big deal out of it, for example. And sometimes that even if you go and report something, unfortunately in a majority of some countries, not all, some, the police can be very corrupt. The whole investigation can be very corrupt, and sometimes people don't really want to know what's happened. They turn a blind eye. And then in other cases, the culture and the people around you and the community around you, they support you better than the society themselves, than the people that are meant to be in the people of care. So let me give you a couple of examples of things I've experienced. So at the time, I think I was about 37, 38. I'd gone travelling. I'd been travelling around the world anyway. I'd got some experience of travelling around the world. But a couple of things that bring into my head, even though now I'm in my 40s and I'm seeing it happen on a big scale, A recent one was example, I was going to a shopping mall, and as I'd parked my car, got out my car, my vehicle, I was approaching the entrance of the shopping mall, and I saw this particular vehicle basically going extremely fast as it's zipping in and out of the mall area. And as it was doing so, most of these places have a very small speed limit for being able to drive around in the shopping area, because obviously there's pedestrians there, there's children there, and you're being safe. This particular individual was not doing that, therefore they got my attention. And as I was approaching the mall area, there was a woman in front of me. Now, this particular woman, I couldn't really tell her age initially, but obviously as I got closer, I realised she was quite young. And what was happening was this person kept chasing her in the car, and she was doing her best to run away from him. And as I got closer, she's a lot shorter than me in height. I'm 5'10", and I've got quite a unique stature. So obviously in comparison to other females, I'm a lot taller, I'm a lot broader, and sometimes that comes to your advantage. I got closer to this woman and said, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" And she was, obviously very, very shaken up, very, very disturbed. And when I glanced back to see what had gone on, there was a guy actually chasing her in the car and making quite rude and quite graphic context and shouting things at her that were extremely inappropriate, obviously. She was very, very shaken up, and it was clear he wanted her phone number, and she wasn't going to give it. She wasn't interested at all. She just wanted to get into the shopping mall, go and do what she needed to do, and just be left alone. And I said to her, even though our language was different, I was speaking in English, she was speaking in Arabic. She didn't understand, and then she sort of understood what I was trying to say, that I'm trying to help her. And I got her with me to come into the shopping mall, and as she got through the shopping mall area, I just wanted to check that she was okay. And she was visibly very, very shaken up and very disturbed by what had gone on. Now, she, I think, was shocked that I actually stood up and said something and actually got her to be okay, got her to get in the mall and to be all right, whereas other people might have necessarily ignored that. And I think it shocked her that, firstly, even though I was not from that country, I was there supporting her and making sure that she was okay. And sometimes people don't do that, do they? They see things and they think, it's not my problem, I'm not going to do anything. Well, I can recall being in that predicament when I was young. I can recall being 15, maybe not even 15, maybe 13, 14, and going down to the supermarket from my family house in the UK and being followed by a car, and being stalked by this car constantly. And as I'd gone shopping to get milk or something for my family and I'd come back, this car was following me again. And the car had got to the point where he chased me and blocked off the entrance so I couldn't go anywhere. And the window of the driver's seat was wound down. And the next thing I know, at that age, I was being dragged into his vehicle. Now, there was 2 young boys in the back of that car, which I presume were his sons. They must have been at the age of like 4, maybe 3 years old. They didn't say a word, they were just watching what was going on. And I just remember, out of sheer panic, punching this man in the face and punching him in the chest and just basically screaming at the top of my lungs. And even though I could tell people were around, they didn't do anything. And luckily for me, one of my school friends that was in the year from my school, I think she was in the same year as me, she saw what happened as she was coming up the hill and obviously recognised it was me and came and pulled me out of the car and stopped me from hitting this man quite fiercely. And luckily for her, she had the common sense to quickly, and this is back in the day before mobile phones, before, you could take pictures and stuff like that. She had the common sense to record in her head what his registration vehicle was, because I obviously was too shaken up to even notice. And I decided at that point, not to say anything to my parents, not to tell them what gone on, purely because we were from a culture where, you sort of don't disclose things like that. And I realised afterwards that's wrong, And this girl, she went into school the next day, reported it to my form tutor, who then decided to come and do a home visit to my parents and told my parents what had gone on. And I think that's when I realised, actually, I should have said something, because obviously it came out what happened. And the police got involved and the driver was obviously dealt with. But, think about how that could have been quite a different scenario, if I hadn't dealt with this guy, but also this girl hadn't come along. Now, things have got worse over time, and by worse, I mean, I guess because of social media now, it's so easy to share documentation, it's so easy to share situations of sexual harassment, and unfortunately, the worst case scenario of that, and we're all aware of what happens in these cases, where sadly women are attacked in many, many different forms. And it's not something that's going to change overnight. It's going to happen culture by culture, tradition by tradition, and also some of the laws that are being put into force or into play, they also need to be, put into action and reinforced as well. And it's not going to happen that as quickly as we think it's going to be. At the moment, there is lots of social media going around trying to educate people about what sexual harassment is. So there's a famous clip that I've seen recently where it involves an Indian lady actually in a tuk-tuk with a woman at her side and 2 boys, and then opposite her is another young man who is stroking the bottom of her foot. Now, some people might consider that as not being sexual harassment. It is clearly sexual harassment. You're stroking a person's body part that is not related to you. It's not appropriate. It's not acceptable. But the woman, unfortunately, is not in a position to do anything about it at that time. But in the video clip, as you discover and watch it, you'll see that she's actually recording him live, and she's put it on like a Facebook feed and told people where she is, so that when she gets out of the tuk-tuk, somebody can hopefully help her, And in the video clip, they do. And that's what I'm saying. These things are slowly changing. There's another one that's come out recently where it shows, a young girl receiving a parcel from a family member that's over in another country. And she looks absolutely stunning in the dress. And unfortunately, the mum has quite a lot of reservations about her young daughter wearing this particular dress, because she's saying it's revealing and she's going to cause issues to herself, And you have a lot of flashbacks done in this particular clip where the mother actually has experienced, unfortunately, some very horrible situations and trauma in her life. And due to that situation, she's remembering that stigma that she received from, unfortunately, a family member, and she's traumatized by it. And unfortunately, the trauma reiterates for her own daughter. And what's nice about that clip is that there's a moral message afterwards about how you shouldn't let people dictate to you what you can and can't wear. That is not what's causing sexual harassment, it's the people around you. And at the end of that clip, the mother, scolds people in society that are making comments about her daughter and what she's wearing. And it's good to see that, these things are happening. These things are being re-educated to people that what you're doing is not acceptable, And then, like I said to you, it's going to take time for that to happen. In some countries, the Me Too movement has just started recently on a big scale, and I mean big scale. And it is brilliant to see that people are stepping up, they're speaking up, and they're saying out loud that, these particular actions are not acceptable. The way that you treat a female within society is not acceptable. And the levels, and there are levels of harassment, definitely sexual harassment, that unfortunately can lead to other cases, other trauma situations, that I'm obviously, you're aware of, like the Harvey Weinstein cases and so on. Unfortunately, this does happen in our society. It should not happen. It should not be happening, but unfortunately it is. And, there are other repercussions as well, because sometimes when the victim is going to report these cases and is, finding the courage to go report these cases and scenarios, unfortunately, in some cases, they're not supported, they're not validated. The medical background, the medical evidence sometimes is on purpose tampered with, okay, or not taken seriously, or the evidence hasn't been collected in an appropriate manner. Like I said, sometimes these individuals have influence as well. And unfortunately, it can get to a stage where the woman is left feeling even more traumatized by having gone through that. If you look at some court systems and you look at, the evidence that they have to pull for a majority of cases, there has to be quite a lot of evidence. And you'll see from some very famous case scenarios where, unfortunately, again, as I said to you, the woman is targeted. The woman is the one that's put in the position of, well, why did you do this and why did you do that? They're not necessarily looking at the man's actions behind this. And as I've already made clear at the start of this particular podcast, sexual harassment and worst case scenarios where you have, unfortunately, victims of rape and serious assault, they are always targeting the female and putting the ownership on her. And that it should not be the case. It shouldn't be the case. Like I said, it is slowly changing in these countries. Recently, somebody that was a religious leader had said some quite crude comments in regards to some of the new laws that had come out and was dealt with. And that's proactive, to see that this particular person, an individual, despite the fact they'd got a particular position, they've been removed from their particular authority ownership, of their position, because this was a person of influence spouting rubbish that does not support the new movement and the new thinking and the new way forward. Yeah? These cases are not going to be, small cases where, like I said, it's going to take time for it to be removed from society as a whole. So going forward, how do we do that? It's not going to happen, like I said, overnight. How do we eradicate sexual harassment in the first place? How do we educate the majority of men that unfortunately are the ones that are doing these particular scenarios? Like I said, I'm particularly focusing on the female point of view, from this particular aspect. And I'm not unmindful that females don't take a counter effect of this from another angle. For example, some women also can be targeted. They can also be the person that's perpetrating it to a female or male. It can happen in lots and lots of cases. From a cultural point of view, and a societal point of view and a religion point of view, it's going to take a lot of groundwork to shake off the past traditions and the past cultures and the past modes of normality in order to move forward. Individuals that are unfortunately at the moment blaming everything on the female, they need re-educating, and it starts at home. Now, I am deadly sure that a lot of them will have mothers, will have sisters, will have aunts and will have lots of female relatives, grandparents, where if someone was to even think of sexually harassing any of their family member, it would be a big taboo situation. It'd be a big no-no, and I'm sure there would be some reaction. However, the hypocrisy lies in the fact that these same individuals, not all, some, let's be clear, some, have the distinct validation that it's okay to continue to harass someone because they don't see it as harassment. You know, I'll give you an example that I went through myself. Like I said, I've travelled quite a bit. One particular area, I was going down this particular street that has lots and lots of shops, and I walked daily to a particular marina in the heat to this particular place. The shopkeepers always say things like, come in my shop, I'm selling this, I'm selling that. That's part of their normal custom, you know, every day. And one particular morning, it was a different scenario, it was a different situation where as I was walking down the street, they got used to me answering, obviously, no, it's okay, next time, and so on. And in this one particular occasion, as I'm walking down the street, I had my headphones in actually at that time. I was listening to some music, and as I was walking down the street, minding my own business, I felt somebody grab hold of my arm and drag me across. And as I glanced to my right hand side to see who it was, what was happening to me, it was one of the shop guys, you know, the shopkeepers. And as he dragged my arm, he started to touch the top part of my body, which is a big no-no in this culture that I'm talking about. I'm not going to say the country, but basically it's a big no-no there, you know. And obviously my reaction with my other hand was to punch him in the chest and to pull him away and to get him off me. And I was screaming at the top of my lungs at him, saying a lot of swear words, if I'm honest. Get your, hands off me, what are you doing, and so on. And he was aiming to punch me in the face. Now, what I did was purely just out of self-defense. I was trying to get him off me. He was nobody that I knew. He was not a member of my family, not a member of my friendship group. And I shouldn't even have to justify that at all. Basically, you shouldn't even touch me, full stop, you know. But I'm just making it clear this is a stranger. And as I was screaming and as I was shouting, the next thing I know, there is about 40, 50 guys around me. Now, across the street, as this was carrying on, I didn't realise until after that there was actually policemen and army men stood watching this in their police vehicle. Okay, so as bold as brass, they just stood there watching this whole scenario unfold. Not one of them decided to come and help me, support me, or to even ask what's gone on. Not one person. The people that helped me out were the people in the streets. The shopkeepers, the customers, the tourists like myself going up and down the street. And, obviously, when I got very verbal with this man in his face, I was like, don't you dare touch me again. Don't you dare even lay a finger on me again. And you're lucky I haven't chopped your fingers off. Understandably, I was in the heat of the moment, but I was making it clear that this man had no right to touch me whatsoever. And if he had the bold brass to do that to me in daylight, we're talking about like maybe 11 o'clock in the morning, when this was happening, what is he going to do to other individuals? And he was screaming and shouting in my face as the other guys basically restrained him and pulled him back. And I had other men come up to me and say, it's okay, relax, calm down. I said, how am I going to relax? How am I going to calm down after what he's just done? And I said, he's lucky that I've not, hurt him further, because you've got no right to do that to me. Now, like I said to you, throughout that whole incident, the police are watching, the army's watching. And it just made me feel like nobody's actually on my side. Now, that happened in broad daylight. What would happen if that was a younger individual? What would happen if they were dragged into the shop and something happened to them unexpected? We don't know. My scenario could have turned out to be completely different, And I continued my day. I walked off and I calmed down, and I didn't think to report it to the police or army or whatever, because I just thought, what's the point? Because I can clearly see it's not going to support me. It's not going to be on my side. And I'm sure quite a lot of other people are in that particular position where they feel the same. The other scenario that happened to me that sticks in my memory, and I'll never forget it, and it was before this particular incident, was where I'm in a taxi, and it was the first time I'd got into a taxi, actually, and the taxi driver was known to the hotel where I was staying, okay, but on that particular day when I was going somewhere, I was going for like a job interview, so I was dressed in like a suit. My dress was a suit dress. It was very long, beyond the knees. I don't even need to explain this to you, but I feel like I have to just put it into context so you can understand. My feet, unfortunately, had been bitten by so many mosquitoes. I had a huge, massive allergic reaction where my legs had swollen up like elephant trunks, and I had huge hives all over my feet and my legs. And I was receiving medical treatment for it. I was receiving some antihistamine and some other things, but obviously they were not going to be, going down anytime soon. And you were always told in this particular country, sit in the back seat, don't sit in the front. These are the safety things you need to do when you're in a particular taxi as a female travelling around. It's like, fair enough, okay. But unfortunately, I couldn't sit in the back seat because I'm tall, couldn't put the seat forward, couldn't even get in, so I had to sit in the front. Anyway, I went to the job interview. I had to go in my flip-flops, and I'd come back from the job interview, and this taxi driver came and picked me back up. And my legs are obviously swollen even more at this point, so I knew I was needing some more antihistamine and maybe need to go and see someone at the hospital for further treatment. And the next thing I know, we're into the journey, and this man, he's probably like 75, 76 years old. He'd been okay with me on the previous taxi journey, taking me to the job interview and then obviously bringing me back. But the next thing I know, as he's driving, he pulls over to my side, leans over, practically head in my lap, and pulls my dress up and starts stroking my legs. And you can imagine my reaction. My reaction was to punch him in the face. Now, I'm brought up to respect my elders, okay? And never in a million years would I hurt or injure somebody older than me. But in this particular scenario, he's out of line. He's touching my body, and he's touching my body in a very inappropriate manner. And my reaction was to punch him in the face and continue punching him in the face. And I didn't know any particular words in his particular language, okay? Because I'm obviously not in my own country at this point. And he stops the car, and he starts to lock the door to try and not let me get out, okay, of the taxi. It's not automatic door, it's an automatic door, but the window in this particular vehicle is still a window you can wind down. So I wound the window down, and I was screaming at the top of my lungs for someone to come and help me. And then all of a sudden, next thing I know, there is again about 40, 50 people gathered round, coming out of nowhere. The street was empty, but out of nowhere, all these people gathered round. They opened the door, they got me out. They didn't even need to ask me what happened. And whilst I was pulled to one side, they said to me, what's gone on, whilst they held the driver. And I explained what had happened. And all I could hear is this man then suddenly finds English words, and he says, girlfriend, you're my girlfriend. And I'm thinking, you're old enough to be my grandfather, mate, let alone my dad's age. I'm not your girlfriend. Actually, I'm old enough to be your granddaughter, and you've got no right to touch me in that manner. Now, again, that scenario, I was enraged, and I was angry, and I was upset, and I was violated. I didn't let it put me off from staying or travelling in this country at all. I decided that I wasn't going to let it hold me back. But it made it clear to me that, unfortunately, predators can come in any shape or form or age, And just because somebody is like a grandfather age or a grandfather figure, and you wouldn't think that they were going to do something like that to you, they can. And I'm sure some of you can relate to some of these situations. But where do we move forward from this? Where do we go forward from this, where we're re-educating people that scenarios like I've described are just not acceptable at all, And some people use the whole label of the fact that you're a foreigner and you're from the West, that they describe you as being loose, inverted commas. Like, for example, it's acceptable to do that to you because in your culture it's okay. Well, it's not okay. It is not okay. It's not okay to touch anybody's body in an appropriate way. Nobody's body should be touched. We have this thing called personal space, and it's there for a reason. But culturally, it seems that some individuals think it's acceptable to touch somebody in that manner because they're not from their country and they're deemed as being loose. Well, no, that mentality and that mind frame and that lack of understanding or misunderstanding concept needs to change and needs to change pronto. And I'm glad that these countries that I'm talking about, the ones that I've travelled to, are the ones that are now stipulating these rules and these laws. And I hope that they, reinforce it, which by the looks of it, they are doing so. But like I said, it's going to take a long time to move forward, not from a small scale, from a big scale. There needs to be re-education with the young men, with the adults, and with the females as well. It's not just a one particular aspect. And I hope, like the cases I've explained to you, where, okay, these scenarios have happened, and I've been fortunate and I've been blessed that people have come to my help and my rescue. But I'm sure there are scenarios and there are cases where sadly that's not been the case, and sadly there hasn't been the evidence there to support that person. And whether you think that I'm in the wrong or right for attacking these people, if that's what you want to call it, personally for me, it was self-defense. Should we be helping our younger females to learn more about self-defense, for example, and be more autonomous in the fact that they're saying, excuse me, what you're doing is unacceptable? Actually finding the voice, even though it's not your country. Now, as I said to you, there are times when you think to yourself, I don't want to make a scenario. I don't want to be put in prison. I don't want to have false charges made against me because, as I've said to you, some of these countries, not all, some of these countries are very corrupt and the law is on the man's side. And, allegations and all sorts of things are made against you very easily. Very easily. And those things also need to change too, don't they? They need to change as part of this movement, okay? I can recall, when you take out property abroad and you rent property abroad, automatically as a female, the number one thing they say to you all the time, do not invite men to your house. You are not allowed. And you're thinking to yourself, why are you even saying that to me? Because it's not even something that's even occurred in my brain. It's not even a thought that's occurred in my brain. I don't know anybody here, for example. I've moved here by myself because I'm travelling. Why would I even contemplate having a stranger in my house? This is what I mean. This whole mentality, this whole concept of whether you're foreign or you're not foreign, or whether you're in the country that you consider to be your home, it needs to change, And this whole community accepting the rules, and stipulations of sexual harassment and what it actually boils down to. The whole concept of blaming the female has to change. The whole concept of targeting the female, whether she is wearing perfume, whether she is dressed without what somebody else considers modesty, because people are being judgmental, whether they're not considering them to be religious or so on and so on and so on. That's down to them and their judgmentality, but that needs to change. It is not the female's fault. None of it is. None of it is. It comes down to what is going on with the guys, And in a lot of ways, some of these countries have the utmost respect for the females. This is what I find bonkers sometimes, because you travel to some of these countries and you'll see the very, very traditional, almost Victorian style, the gentleman opening doors for the lady and being polite and helping with luggage and helping with so on. Yet you've got this double standard side where this, unfortunately, the sexual harassment cases I've just talked to you about do happen. And as I've said, I've kept it to the point where I've kept the discussion in a mild manner. I'm aware of far severe trauma cases that I'm not going to disclose on here because obviously those cases have been dealt with in court or they've been dealt with individually and certain individuals don't want it discussed. But I'm well aware there's far more worst case scenarios than what I've disclosed. Moving forward, as I've said to you, these situations, they need to move, they need to change. People need to change their mentality and their thinking of what is acceptable and what clearly is not. And that is going to take time for it to ripple down from, say, a grandfather's viewpoint generation to grandmother to your mum, dad's age, and just further generations will have that ripple effect. And we all have to stand together. We all have to stand united. And that is the way of going forward, hopefully. I'm sure we're going to have a look at this topic again another time. But, let me know your thoughts. Let me know your ideas about this. I'm sure some of you will have some of your own viewpoints as well. But for now, take care. Look out for each other. And if you're listening to this and, things mirror something with you that you need to change, then start making that change. Let's move forward, guys. Take care. Peace.